first thing, just to about process, I think I've said this to both of you, but just to remind, in addition to these classes, as part of the conversion process, please schedule every 3 to 6 weeks a meeting with me. It doesn't have to be, it could be 8 weeks, that's okay, or 10 weeks, but just that we can, in addition to group classes, we can also just I can stay abreast of how, the transition to Jewish observance is taking place for you, and the pace, and just family, and whatever, everything's going well. If you have other questions, of course, you can ask me anytime. I'll call me or email at any point if something is amiss. And in addition to these classes, try to make your way through books. If through the CRC they're going to do the conversion. They have their own syllabus, and some books can be swapped in or swapped out, which I would recommend in some cases. But the point is constantly learning and reading, right? So the class is meant to sort of supplement the own reading that you're doing and the review that you're doing, and at a pace that is authentic for you and works for your life, that you're incorporating Jewish observance into your life, at a, again, steady, gradual pace, okay? We've talked about all that in person, but I'm just saying it again. So okay, so the first unit is sort of the history of the Torah, and like how Judaism, how our Jewish observances emerge. Okay, history of halakha, history of the Jewish way of life, the Jewish legal system, Jewish practice, and like Torah in general. So if you read the first chapters of Genesis, which I recommend you should also do, that should also be, like the Torah would be a good book to have on your reading list, if it's not there already. You'll see in the first chapter of Genesis, God creates, we talked about this last week a little bit also, God creates the universe creates the humanity without any differentiation, without any distinction, and God is disappointed in humanity. And the first people are expelled from the Garden of Eden, and then 10 generations later, things have turned out badly, and all humanity is wiped out in the flood. Noah and his sons are saved, and again, God is disappointed, and there's the story of the Tower of Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, and again, humanity disappoints God. And so after this point, God focuses on one family, on Abraham and Sarah and their children, and then at this point the Torah's focus zooms in and focuses on becomes the story of the Jewish people. So it no longer involves itself with the story of humanity writ large. So obviously, humanity writ large is still important, but we don't know we don't know about that anymore from the Torah, because the Torah narrows its focus and tells the story of the Jewish people and our encounter with God. It seems that the patriarchs and the matriarchs lived a life that reflected the values that were important for God to be lived out in the world. God speaks about Abraham as exemplifying justice and righteousness in the world and teaching his children to act that way, that not only could you have a righteous individual, but a righteous individual who believes in the power of education, that you can accomplish something ethically in your life and then transmit that to the next generation. And the Torah explicitly says that this is what signified Abraham as being different from others. So there are some specific, let's say, values and practices that the patriarchs exemplified in their life, and there are also some commandments that the patriarchs and matriarchs had, and they're explicitly in the Torah. So there are 7 mitzvot, 7 commandments that the Torah that we, the rabbis understand and read the Torah and interpret it and see that there are 7 commandments that are universal, that every human being is prohibited from worshiping idols and from murder and from stealing, etc. And these are understood to be kind of a cornerstone of a basic ethical society, and these are derived or from verses that come from God's conversation with Noah after the flood. So there's these mitzvot are a bedrock sort of ethical practice for all humanity. But then mitzvot start creeping in as well in the relationship with the patriarchs and matriarchs, that Abraham is commanded to circumcise his sons. And for the time of Abraham, Jewish boys have been circumcised at 8. And so that's a mitzvah within the family that is before the revelation at Sinai, and there are a handful of other mitzvot that seem to be described in the book of Genesis, let's say, as the Torah describes the family, the household of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. There are a few other mitzvot are added in as well, or alluded to in the book of Exodus. It seems the Jewish people were given the mitzvot of Shabbat to celebrate the Sabbath day. Also, before we got to Mount Sinai, that when they were in the desert, manna came down from heaven and fed them, but they got double portion on Friday, so they weren't going to go out and collect on Saturday. That's all before the Torah was given. That's why, by the way, on Shabbat meals we have 2 loaves of bread, right, to commemorate that double portion of manna that came from heaven on Fridays. This is also before Sinai, but then everything changes, and that's Sinai. Okay, that's the revelation of Sinai. That's the most important, kind of event in Jewish history, and that's when we got the Torah. So all the mitzvot we had before, over there, maybe they're about some sort of innate morality that doesn't have to be commanded. Maybe they were about a handful of commandments, a handful of mitzvot that give you a taste of what the Torah is going to be about, and then we appeared at Sinai and we were given the Torah. So what were we given at Sinai? So it's a little more complicated than. Very simple level, we were given the written Torah at Sinai. It seems, and the Talmud discusses this, it seems that the written Torah wasn't all given in one book at Sinai, but we were given it piecemeal over the course of Moses' 40-year career leading the Jewish people. Moses got bits of revelation, bits of instructions from God, and wrote down a few chapters, taught them to the people, and at the end of his life, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses were completed. That seems to make the most sense. That seems to be the way what the Torah describes. But I think what's the word that is a literary device? It's called the part for the whole like what's it called, metonymy? So, have you ever heard that metonymy? This is a little digression, but metonymy. Yeah. Substitution of the name of an attribute or adjunct for that thing meant, for example. So you say, not an example. Yeah, say suit instead of business executive, right? You say, the suits are coming down to tell us what to write. So you say suit to mean somebody wears a suit. You'd say the White House released a statement today saying blah 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 blah, right? That's not an example. You'd say all hands on deck. All hands on deck is an autonomy, but you don't just want the hands. You want it's a part for a whole. So that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the other one, which is, it's called synecdoche. Is a figure of speech in which a term for a part of something refers to the whole of something, or vice. No, that's. Yeah, whatever. You can say the White House released a statement today. Autonomy, I'm not going to right now explain the difference. There's a whole website which explains what the difference is. Look at that. Okay, which I will not. Okay, Sinai. Okay, stands for the divine revelation of the Torah. Okay, it's a mountain. Okay, in the desert, but it also stands for this fact, this cornerstone belief of Judaism that the Torah that we study is the product of divine revelation. That God communicated God's will to the Jewish people. That we call this moment of communication Sinai, and something was communicated at this mountain called Sinai in the desert at a certain day, but maybe the process took 40 years over the course of Moses' career. Doesn't really matter all that much. That historical question is less important, I think, than the fact that at the core of our way of life is the belief that God communicated God's will, gave us the Torah. So the Gege actually gave it, okay, so far so good, right? Yes? Questions, comments? We didn't just get the Torah. We didn't just get the written Torah. When I say the written Torah, I mean the 5 books of Moses, which we have in our Torah scrolls, right, in our scrolls. We didn't just get the written Torah, we also got something called the oral Torah. Okay, the oral Torah is the interpretation of the written Torah. It's the accompanying oral tradition. Oral tradition meaning it was never written down, which was passed down orally from teacher to student. The accompanying oral accompaniment to the written Torah. And what does that entail? So it can entail a number of things. At a very basic level, the written Torah is a bunch of letters. So we have a tradition of what the letters are. That's the written Torah. How do you pronounce those letters? How do you read those letters? That's oral Torah. Right? Hebrew is written without, Hebrew in the Torah is written without any punctuation, without any vocalization. If you've learned to read Hebrew yet, you know there are the letters and the vowels. I got that right? So the vowels were invented much later. and it's a system for writing down the way the word is supposed to sound given the letters. But the vowels are not in the Torah, and the vowels weren't invented for many thousands of years later. So how you pronounce the words, how you read those words, sometimes there are multiple options, right? That's oral Torah, that's an oral tradition. Like, this is what those words are supposed to sound like. This is where you put the pauses in between the verses. When somebody reads Torah in synagogue, he doesn't have in the Torah scroll any of that. The melody he's using, the pauses between verses, the way he pronounces the words, he's had to learn that from a different guidebook. And the content, that's also oral Torah. That's its own tradition of how the written Torah is read. And what does the written Torah mean? The written Torah has a lot of ambiguous things. And the tradition of what the meaning of those ambiguous things are, that's the oral Torah. That's passed down orally. And we believe that's like a defining belief of, our form of Judaism, as opposed to all sorts of other ancient Israelite religions and ancient Jewish sects in the thousands of years ago. We believe that the oral Torah as well is from God and is part of this revelation that Moses received at Sinai. Now, there is a range of opinions of what exactly how comprehensive the oral Torah was. Where some say the oral Torah was very, very comprehensive, and all the details and all the minutiae were included in that oral Torah, like comprehensive revelation. Others say, no, the oral Torah was much more limited, and included maybe at its core it was God's command to Moshe, here's the written Torah, and I want you to figure out what it means. That end of the spectrum, a more limited revelation of the oral Torah, that helps us understand the Talmud a little bit better, rabbinic literature, which seems to devote a lot of energy and a lot of time to figuring out what precisely the biblical verses mean. I'm teasing it. For example, some examples. The Torah says, "Lo tevashel gedi b'chelev imo," shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. It says it 3 times. So what does that mean? So you might think it means it's a prohibition against boiling a little goat in its own mother's milk, because that's a cruel thing to do. I don't know, right? But the oral tradition teaches us that no, it says it 3 times. 1 time to teach us there's a prohibition against cooking any dairy with any meat product. 2nd time to say there's a prohibition against eating any meat or dairy product that was cooked together. And the 3rd time to tell us there's a benefit prohibition against, let's say, selling or benefiting from meat and dairy that have been cooked together. So that's the oral tradition tells us that. So did God tell Moshe, it's 3 times in the Torah to teach you these 3 things, and that was passed on orally? Possibly. Or it could be that thousands of years later, the rabbis were doing what they were supposed to do, which is to study the Torah and figure out what it means and make sense of it, and this is the answer they came up with. That seems a little more convincing to me because it, again, it makes sense of all the energy in the Talmud to like kind of what does this mean? What does this mean? No, the analogy that this task of the rabbis of figuring out what the meaning of these verses are is it's been compared to hanging up. You have like a lot of shirts and you want to hang them up in your closet, and let's say you have 10 hangers and you have 10 shirts, and every shirt needs a hanger and every hanger needs a shirt, and no hanger can have 2 shirts, and no shirt can be left without a hanger. Okay? You have all the mitzvot, you have all the rules, and then you have all the verses in the Torah, and you have to pair the mitzvot with the rule. You have to figure, right? It all has to work out neatly. You have to make sure that, and that's a lot of the Talmud is just back and forth, trying to, well, if you think the hanger has this shirt, then that shirt gonna have on, right? If this verse means this, if one of our times the Torah says do not boil a kid in its mother's milk means there's a benefit prohibition, then how do we know this other thing? Like what gets left out? How do we make sure all our facts are accounted for as we try to make sense of what the Torah means? Another example. Torah says the holiday of Passover, and the Torah says after Passover we start counting. Mimacharat HaShabbat, the day after Shabbat, we count 50 days, and there's another holiday called Shavuot. So what does that mean? We start counting the day after Shabbat. So what might you think the day after Shabbat means? If I say the day after Shabbat, you might think, what day is that?
Saturday night.
Or, right, Saturday night, Sunday. We start counting Saturday night, Sunday. That's the day after Shabbat. But no, apparently the rabbis discovered, or had a tradition that this was the case, that in this verse, the word Shabbat doesn't mean Saturday. In this verse, the word Shabbat means the the first day of Passover is referred to as a Shabbat. It's a sacred day, it's a holiday, and it's referred to as a Sabbath day in this verse. And so we start counting the 50 days from Passover to Shavuot. We start counting those days on Passover. Now we don't wait until the first Sunday after Passover. And that was the dispute that divided the Jewish world. The rabbinic Jews who believed in the Oral Torah, we accepted that understanding of what that verse meant, and that's how we celebrate Shavuot. This illustrates the need for some sort of authority structure, some sort of decision-making mechanism, so that everyone can be on the same page and celebrate their holidays together at the same time. So this process, this initiative of figuring out what the verses of the Torah mean, spreading and teaching the oral tradition, and again, discovering new meanings in the Torah, this gave rise to a body of literature, a genre of literature known as Midrash. Midrash means explaining the Torah. Ashley, you're comparing from your notes from last time? Is it?
I have a lot, yeah.
Is it more or less the same, or is it?
Yeah.
Incredible. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. If I contradict myself, you'll catch me. Okay.
Absolutely.
And needless to say, you don't have to. Obviously, you don't have to keep coming back, right? Now that you know that
I know.
you're welcome. Obviously, you're welcome to. And
I know. All good.
and all of you, any of you are welcome to invite friends, and even Jewish people are very welcome to come to this class. Like I think I try, hopefully be relevant for anyone. So. So Midrash, explaining verse, there are two types of Midrash. It's a genre of literature, it's a genre of rabbinic creativity. It has two parts. It's what's called Midrash Halacha and Midrash Agadah. Midrash Halacha is explaining what the legal portions of the Torah mean. Like I just said, like don't boil a kid's mother's milk. Like the Torah says all sorts of mitzvot, legal sections of the Torah. What do they mean practically? That's part of Midrash Halacha. It's called Midrash Halacha, that body of literature, that endeavor. And the other type of Midrash is called Midrash Agadah, that is explaining the stories of the Torah. And because this Torah also contains many stories, and those stories also are cryptic. Like the Torah tells, I think of the example, this week's Torah portion, when we read about Jacob fighting with an angel. He tells the angel, tell me your name. The angel doesn't say anything. The angel gives Jacob his name. What the heck is that story about? Who was that angel? Who was Jacob fighting? Why did the angel tell him his name? Why did the angel say, I have to go now, it's morning time, let me go? Why did the angel have to go? What's so important about the morning? What's the story about? The Torah, a few weeks ago, we read about Abraham being sent to the land of Canaan by God. Why was Abraham chosen for this mission? Abraham had not distinguished himself in any way in the Torah before this. What was so special about Abraham? So these are questions that if you read the Torah, you'll be, this is a strange word, or, this is like a really important detail of the story that's not here. So Midrash Agadah is filling in those gaps. And so maybe some of that is also part of this oral tradition. Maybe some of that is the creative mind of rabbinic scholars trying to answer these questions. The questions come from the text, right? It's a subtle, sophisticated, nuanced way to read the text, even though they're literally not there, right? It's not in the Torah itself. It's a midrash. It's somebody's sermon, somebody's idea, somebody's interpretation. So it's not like authoritative in that same way. You don't have to believe that it's true, but you can't believe it's foolish, because it is responding to a real question that comes from the Torah, and it is responding to that question in a way that ought to be, that should be sensitive to the Torah as a whole. So there are collections of ancient Midrash Halacha, and there are collections of ancient Midrash Agadah, and that's what they contain.
Where do some of these stories come from? Like some of them are really elaborate. So how do they come up with these elaborate stories about?
So maybe they came up with them because it's an ancient tradition that goes back to when the thing happened itself. Maybe it is true in that way, or it's they didn't have television or the internet back then, so their creativity was all, but they studied Torah. So, and these were real characters. Abraham, Moses, these are real people to them. Not they aren't real people to us, but they lived with them. They knew them. They were in very intimate terms with these characters. They thought about them all the time. They studied the Torah so much. So you can fill in these details. And I don't mean this disrespectfully, but fan fiction ever, sort of, right? You have a story you really love, so I'm going to write what happened when, when Harry Potter went to medical school, like what happened, I don't know, right? If you know the books, if you know the books really well, and you really are committed to those stories, you could write about Harry Potter in medical school because, you know the character, right? So you know Abraham, so the questions that come up for it, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. All right, let's talk about history. I'm going to take a digression now. Let's talk about this timeline. So the 5 books of Moses tells the story of family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They go down to Egypt. They become slaves there. Generations later, Moses brings them out of slavery, brings them 40 years in the desert. Moses dies right before they enter the land of Israel. Then the rest of the Hebrew Bible tells the continuation of that story. Joshua brings them into the land of Israel, and the period of the Judges begins. The land of Israel is more or less conquered by the 12 tribes, and eventually the book of Samuel tells us they consolidate into one kingdom under King Saul. And then King David takes over the kingdom from Saul, and then his son Solomon rules, and after Solomon's death, the kingdom splits in two, and the northern kingdom is conquered by the Assyrian Empire in 722, and the southern kingdom is conquered by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. And then 70 years later, the Babylonian Empire is conquered by the Persians, and the Persian emperor gives the Jews permission to return to the land of Israel and rebuild the temple. And that's the second temple, and the Jews have a little kingdom there under the Persian Empire, and then eventually Alexander the Great comes in. Let me see, he comes in 170. He comes in. When is Alexander the Great? 200. This is also a digression, but Alexander the Great. He dies in 323. Alexander the Great conquers the world, 323. After he dies, his kingdom is split amongst his 3 sons. The land of Israel is sort of in between the borderline between 2 of his kingdoms of his children, the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. And the Hanukkah story is all about conflict between those 2 different kingdoms, each of which is a successor of Alexander the Great's empire that he divides upon his death among his 3 kids. And then eventually the Romans come, Pompey and Julius Caesar and all that, Mark Antony, those people, and the land of Israel becomes part of the Roman Empire. Eventually the Romans put land of Israel, Judea, under direct administration, kind of as a province, a protectorate. In the year 70, there's 67, the Common Era, CE, there's a Jewish revolt against the Romans. It's crushed in the year 70, and the temple is destroyed. After the destruction of the temple, Jewish life recovers. The story is told actually when Jerusalem was besieged by the Roman army. The leader, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, sneaks out of Jerusalem. He has to hide from the Jewish defenders of Jerusalem, who are zealots. They were called the zealots. They were fanatic and didn't, they wanted to fight till everyone was dead and no compromise. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sneaks out, pretends to be dead. His students take him out, sneak him out of the city. He jumps out of his coffin once he's outside the walls, runs to the Roman general and says, first of all, addresses him as emperor. And the general says, I'm not the emperor, I'm just a general. And just then a messenger walks up and says, oh, you're the emperor now. Like the old emperor's dead, you're the emperor now. So he goes, oh, this guy is interesting. So he says, I'll give you one wish, or tell me what can I do, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, just give me Yavne v'chachameh. Let me have Yavne, the town of Yavne, let me establish a school there, and its scholars. And so in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple, Jewish life continues, Torah is studied in Yavne, and Torah scholarship allows Judaism to survive after the temple is destroyed. Things go forward another few generations, and things are better with some Roman emperors, things are worse with some Roman emperors. There's another very bad period of persecution in the year 130s. There's a second Jewish revolt against the Romans. This one is crushed in a very brutal way. It's called the Bar Kokhba revolt. In the aftermath of this revolt, the destruction seems so bad that the decision is made to commit the oral Torah to writing. It's no longer safe for the oral tradition to be passed on verbally from teacher to student, teacher to student. It should be committed to writing. When I say committed to writing, I don't actually mean committed to writing. I mean published as a book, which back then didn't necessarily mean it was written down. In fact, I think many scholars will say, I really have no idea if this is what they teach in university these days, but it was certainly a theory that I heard, and it could be true, so I'm going to share it. When the oral Torah was written down, it wasn't really written, it was just published as an oral book. Okay, that's how they published books back then. You would just have 10 people, they'd all memorize it, it's okay, great, the book's published now, go and, each of you is now a copy of the book. So that's what may have happened around the year 200 of the Common Era, that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah, the prince who was the leading Jewish figure politically and religiously at that time, he commissioned and edited the collection, this beautifully edited, comprehensive collection of, not comprehensive in the sense, not comprehensive in the sense that everything is in it because he edited stuff out, but it's just a nice, every topic is covered, collection of the oral Torah. This is called the Mishnah. See, we're on letter F. The Mishnah is that, you had so many traditions and oral traditions, people teaching students, and so much, it's a risk of being lost, there's persecution, there's war, there's rebellion, and Rabbi Judah the Princess, we have to preserve, and the way to preserve is to publish. So not necessarily written down, but published in the sense of, let me edit, let me correct, let me get this nice, be one version, and it was published as an oral book. Or a written book, we don't know, okay? We will take a look at the Mishnah, maybe next class, and we'll see that it's, you'll see that the Mishnah is, and the Mishnah now exists actually, exists, there are free, pretty decent translations of the entire Mishnah online, if you want to explore. If you go to the website my wife works for, sefaria.org, sefaria.org, and you'll see it's an entire Jewish library online, and you can click on the Mishnah, and you can look at it in English, and you can poke your way around and see what it's like. You'll see that it is apodictic. Apodictic means it tells you what to do in a straightforward way. You'll see that the Mishnah often quotes more than one opinion on important questions, which is interesting. You'll see the Mishnah does not quote sources. It doesn't say where the law comes from, how we know this to be true. Whether it's a law that's from the Torah, whether it's a later piece of rabbinic legislation, like a decree that, or is it actually from the Torah itself? Mishnah doesn't tell us that either. It just tells us what to do. Yes, no, this, how. And so, because of all of those kind of unanswered questions that the Mishnah leaves, or the questions the Mishnah asks, right? If you study the Mishnah, what does this mean? What do I do? Which opinion is correct? What about two places in the Mishnah where it's contradict each other? And where does it even come from anyway? So those types of questions, once the Mishnah was published and shared and taught, gave rise to what's called Gemara. Basically, for several centuries after the Mishnah is published, rabbis ask those kinds of questions about the Mishnah. Where does this come from? Why is this true? Whose opinion is this? Which opinion do we follow? How do I reconcile this statement with a contradictory statement elsewhere. And those conversations also were collected, and the conversations themselves were preserved, and those conversations are known as in Gemara, and together Mishnah and Gemara, that's called Talmud. That's what Talmud is. So these conversations took place throughout the world where Jews were living. They took place in the land of Israel, and eventually that gave rise to what's called the Jerusalem Talmud, the Palestinian Talmud. And these conversations also took place in Babylonia, where even though the Jews came back, as I mentioned earlier, to Israel from Babylonian exile, most of the Jews actually stayed in Babylonia, and that was where most of the Jews lived. There was very large, prominent, successful, thriving Jewish communities in Babylonia for many centuries, and those communities also engaged in these conversations around the Mishnah for centuries of conversations. What does the Mishnah mean? How is it meant to be applied? And those conversations in Babylonia ended up as the Babylonian Talmud. After a lengthy process of editing, which we don't really know that much about, but scholars are trying to reconstruct what that editing process looked like for the Babylonian Talmud and for the Jerusalem Talmud. For our purposes, it doesn't matter too much. We know we have them. Okay, it's the recording of centuries of conversations surrounding the Mishnah. That's the Talmud. The rabbis and scholars who exist in the Mishnah, those are called Tanaim. The rabbis and scholars who are found in the Gemara are called Amoraim. So people talk about the Tanaitic period and the Amoraic period. Tanaitic period, that's from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai until the editing of the Mishnah in the year 200. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sneaks out of Jerusalem in the year 70, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi edits the Mishnah in the year 200. So from 70 to 200, that's 130 years. That's the Tanaitic period. And so the Mishnah is the product of the Tanaitic period. There are a couple of other books that are the product of the Tanaitic period. So there are collections of Midrashim that are from that time period. There's a book called the Tosefta, which is Tanaitic material that didn't make it into the Mishnah. That was kind of from the cutting room floor. And then post-Mishnah, after 200, the rabbis who are named in the Talmud are the Amoraim, and they, again, are found in those conversations that surround the Mishnah. At some point in the history of the Talmud, you stop naming these people, and so that you have this anonymous editorial voice of the Talmud that constructs the conversations, and nobody's name is mentioned there, and scholars think that's a later stage of the Talmud's editing. Like post-Amoraic, it's still in the Talmud. Okay, that's... So after that, I'm saying we've done already like 1,000 or at least maybe 2,000 years of history in like 10 minutes. Is that okay? Are you questions? You all right? Should we go on? You okay? All right, let's go on. So then what happened? The Talmud at some point, so let's go back to our history side of things. Things aren't doing so well in the land of Israel. The Roman Empire is retreated, becomes Christian, and then you have the Parthians are coming, and there's a lot of terrible anti-Semitism, and the land of Israel is being fought over between the Romans and the Parthians, and Jewish life is diminishing in the land of Israel. In Babylonia, things are much better for much longer. And the Babylonian Talmud, therefore, is allowed, develops longer. Be that as it may, there are Talmudic academies that emerge in the land of Israel and in Babylonia. And those academies where the Talmud is studied are called, the heads of those academies are called by the title Gaon. Gaon literally means genius, but in this context, a Gaon means one of these heads of the head of a Talmudic academy in the post-Talmudic period of time, okay? What did the Gaonim do? They taught in their yeshivot. What did they teach? They taught Talmud, and they did not write commentaries to the Talmud. They just taught the Talmud itself. I guess the commentaries was oral. I guess here's the Talmud, here's what it means. They didn't produce any Talmud commentaries. They wrote letters. We have letters to and from the Gaonim, from Jews living all around the world. Ultimately, the Gaonim, the heads of those Talmudic academies in Babylonia, became more influential. Why? Because in the 600s you have Muhammad and the Arab conquest of the Mediterranean. Right there, in like 100 years, the Arabs went from Arabia west across the northern Mediterranean and into Spain. They actually went through Spain up into France. They were stopped at the Battle of Tours in 744 by Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, which was a defeat of civilization in a sense. And they went east into India. And they established a capital for a period of time in Baghdad, which is right next door to where all these yeshivot were. So you had the Babylonian Talmudic academies in Babylonia, which was then, at this point now, this like central region of a global Islamic empire. And they had trade routes that went from Baghdad to North Africa and to Spain and east into Persia. And so it was very easy for the heads of these Talmudic academies, these Geonim, the Gaons, to send and receive letters from people all over the world, Jews all over the world, asking for religious guidance. They could also send fundraisers, right? They could collect money to support their institutions from all over the Jewish world. And so those Babylonian Talmudic academies became prominent, and the Babylonian Talmud became authoritative because those are the people, questions were, so in the land of Israel, they continued to follow their own traditions and the Jerusalem Talmud they developed there, but everywhere else in the Jewish world, it was so much easier to send your questions back to Baghdad, where that's where all the trade routes were. That was the place where everyone was sending letters to and from. So the period of time where we have, that's post-Talmudic, the Talmud was already a closed book at this point, and the main Torah scholarship is emerging from the heads of these academies, who are known by the title Geonim. This is called the Gaonic period. So the Gaonic period is from around the year 600, 700, 800, 900, goes into the 11th century, until the Gaonim are eclipsed by the rise of Torah scholarship in the West. The story is told of a group of fundraisers for this Babylonian yeshiva who were taken captive by pirates in the Mediterranean, and they were ransomed by 4 Jewish communities together. They pooled their resources to ransom these 4 Torah scholars who were fundraisers. But the condition of the ransom was, instead of going back to Baghdad, or to Babylonia, right, to your academies, stay in each of the communities that ransomed you and serve as a rabbi there. So they're freed from captivity, but they had to become rabbis. So if they'd known, they probably would have preferred to stay with the pirates. That's a joke. Okay. So now you have these 4 in Kairouan and in Tunis. They stayed in North Africa, they stayed in Spain, Italy. You had 4 communities which had serious Torah scholars. This is the story. I don't know if it's true or not. It may not be true. It's the foundation myth for Torah scholarship in the West. The West being North Africa, Italy, Spain. North Africa, all the way from Morocco to Tunisia, Libya even. And so all of a sudden, you didn't have to send your questions back to the Gaonim in Babylonia. You had Torah scholarship in your own country that you could turn to. And at a certain point in history, these Torah scholars felt confident breaking in some ways with the Gaonic precedent, deciding questions in new ways based on what they thought was the correct interpretation of the Torah. And that marks the beginning of the period of the Rishonim, the early scholars, which is listed in letter H. I think we're going to pause here now. Next class we'll actually look at some examples. I mentioned I have names of books without showing you those books. So instead of talking about it next time, we're actually going to see those books and get a sense of their style and also how they're printed, what they look like. And we'll go back over again the Mishnah, Talmud, Rishonim, and learn about who they were, what they said. We'll name some examples of rabbis who you may have heard of from each of these periods of Jewish history, and then we'll take the story further. When is the next time we're going to meet? That is a good question. So let's take a minute to just decide that. Let's see. I could meet next Monday, but it would have to be at 8 o'clock. Is that too late for you? Or can you do 8 o'clock? Okay.
Yeah, I'll be out of town.
You'll be out of town.
I'll be here.
You'll be here.
Oh, Josh should be here too. He's just
Let's meet at least for a short class on the 19th at 8 o'clock, maybe wait for half an hour, from like, let's try 8 to 8:30 on the 19th. And the class will be recorded, so you can.
Okay. Do you think if I were to read the readings, it would help me understand more of the history before, like prior to the class?
Yes. I mean, if you read these, yes. I mean, the more reading you can do, it'll help you. These are great books that I listed for this reading for this unit.
Okay.
I wonder if I have one. Yeah. Jay Harris, Have You Noticed, is a bit of a dense book. It's a challenging book to read. It's brilliant. It's changed my life. It's a very influential book for me. It's brilliant, but it's a dense. But it's not light reading. Rav Benny Lau's The Sages is much lighter and easier to read. Wonderful book.
They cover about the same.
Yeah, they're overlapping. Yeah.
Okay.
Oops. Sorry, this is the wrong thing. Alright, so that class will be a little short. It's just 8:30. It'll be recorded, and great. Okay, all good? Stay warm.
See you next. Thank you.
Actually, I'm gonna, since
I'm sitting on